All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fighter Pilot's Guide to Living. We are back with Magoo to talk part where we left off in Italy and doing some low and very safe runs in the A-10 against the Italians. For those of you who just picked up with the last episode. As we're walking through here, we'll kick it off. Magoo, we normally ask it at some point, but how did you get your call sign?
So when I first got to Myrtle Beach, they were going to just finish an operational readiness inspection. And so to blow off some steam from that, they had a big party at the officers club. And customary in the A-10 world, or most Air Force fighter units, is when there's a massive wing get-together, there's a crud tournament. And so the squadron will come up with about 4 or 5 teams of guys to play crud. They go through the night, and the winning crud team from the squadron plays the other 2 squadrons, and it's just fighter pilot insanity. So being a young buck, I was on a bunch of lieutenants playing against some captains and whatnot, and I happened to be paired against this one captain was about 6'3", played basketball at the Air Force Academy. And in those days, we'd go full checking, full contact and all that kind of stuff. So there'd be, blood and cuts and all that kind of stuff. And so he got the cue ball, and I'm running to go block him. And he got really annoyed when I was trying to keep him from the ball. So he shoved me to the side and, looked at me like, "What are you doing, you little son of a bitch?" And I'm like, "Hey, this is the deal. This is what you do." So I kept getting paired against him, and I took a running, literally ran at him. And he maybe moved about a half inch or so, and he got really annoyed with me and said, "What are you doing?" So we finished the game and sat down, and he gave me some grief. And again, I said to him, "Hey, we're all playing the game like it's supposed to be played." He says, and I had kind of longish sideburns at the time, and he said to me, "You got kind of long sideburns, man." He says, "We'll call you Elvis." And I said, "Elvis? I don't look anything like Elvis." So he says, "No, you really don't." So we continued to play the game again. We sat down having a bunch of beers, and he says, "On reflection, you really don't look like Elvis, but you do got pork chop sideburns. We'll call you Pork Chop." And every squadron did things differently. Sometimes they'd have a big, put names up on the whiteboard and pick, but this guy was the picker of names, and it stuck, and I hated it, of course. But it had many variations: Pork de la Chop, Chope de la Pig, El Puerco. And I finally got used to it, but it was funny. We were coming back from Italy, actually, and we stopped through lodges in the Azores, and I was leaving the officers club after the incredible Mongolian night there, which was like world renowned. And so I walk out of the officers club, and in comes some Canadian P3 pilot, and he took a look at me as he walked by, and he says, "Holy shit, you're a Pork Chop?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "I am too." And I looked at we had our Friday night name tags on, and we were both Pork Chop. He says, "Dude, I gotta have that." So I have a Royal Canadian Air Force, Pork Chop name tags. And so first go around was Pork Chop, but then when I got to Eagles and Elmendorf, for whatever reason, they just kept calling me Magoo, which is kind of normal. I've been called Magoo most of my life. So we had a massive call sign party at Elmendorf, and we happened to have 3 Air Force Academy cadets that were visiting us, and they could get rides in the backseat of our Eagles. So they thought they'd died and gone to heaven because they were at a call sign party, and you got locked in a room and whatnot. And there was a couple of guys getting call signs. And these guys started drinking like fish. When the Air Force Academy cadets leave the zoo, all they want to do is get laid and drink. So they were just hammered, and they were drinking. They were trying to hang with us, and they couldn't. They were so drunk they started hurling all over the place. We stacked them like cordwood, one on top of the other at the end of the room, and it got so out of hand that we were all sore. And they nicknamed me. Said, "The hell with that! Pork Chop is stupid. We're naming you Magoo." So they gave me the name, and at the end of the night, which was only like 9 at night, and it was in the summer, so it's light in Alaska. Everybody split to the 4 winds. The squadron commander led my group to my house because my ex-wife was having an anti-call sign party with all the girls at my house. So about half of us went there, and that was a blowout. But a bunch of guys went to the officers club, and no kidding, Pacific Fleet Naval Air Force's commander and his wife were at the O Club that night, passing through, and one of my bros hurled on the admiral's wife's shoes. Oh. That did not go over well. So
I imagine
that our call sign parties were held strictly in a closed room and off base, and usually TDY. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, tell me what makes a call sign
Oh
party, because I've
God.
never heard of a call sign party before.
So every squadron does a little bit different, but for my A-10 one, you had to, and then after that, once you got to be officially named, we had a thing where you had to drink a yard of beer or a yard of some liquid of your choice. And so the lieutenants, the captains, what we call the cable, the captains against the betterment of lieutenants. And then you had the lieutenants was the LPA, the Lieutenants Protection Agency. I think the Navy has some similar thing of that.
Jopa.
Jopa, yeah.
Jopa.
And so as I'm drinking this yard, and I was not a good fast beer drinker, so it was going to take me a while. I think the record in the squadron was like 8.6 seconds, but I was not that guy. And
Jesus. That's
yeah,
insane.
exactly. So as these poor lieutenants are trying to drink their yards, the captains they all have cigars, and they're blowing cigar smoke into the guy's face. They're putting tobacco into the yard, and you had to drink whatever was in there. So that was all part of the insanity. Every squadron had their own, kind of traditions and whatnot. But that was what it was, my A-10 squadron. So it was,
Could you buy your call sign? I heard that before. We're from the Air Force, where if you didn't like it, you could buy it, like usually with
no,
another with like another
no,
drink
fallacy,
or
no.
something. Yeah. Well, I think it changed a little bit
No,
now.
inevitably it was, anal fromage, Someone tell us about yourself, jackass, all that stuff. So no, it was not your choice. And most of them, you guys were better. The best call sign that I came across was actually a Navy one. You've probably seen this guy on TV. He was the first dude that locked up the Tic Tacs off the Pacific Coast.
Oh, yeah. I know who
And
you're talking about.
he's a great, great dude. And he was
Yeah.
a Hornet squadron commander before he retired, or when he retired. And he was a department head in 113 at Lemoore. And so, what was his name? Lieutenant Commander Dave Fravor. And his call sign was Sex Fravor. And it was the coolest thing to walk in the ready room. He's like, "Miguel, like Sex, what's going on, brother?"
He was on that Carrier
Carrier C.
documentary
Yep.
on PBS, and they actually shared his
Did
call
you really?
sign on the PBS document. Yeah, it's there. Like,
Oh, they did. Yeah, I was
name's,
surprised. Yeah.
he introduces himself. He's like, my name's Commander Fravor. Call sign Sex, and he was so proud about it too.
That
On the PBS
you know what?
documentary.
He's a great American,
Oh, no.
great dude.
Yeah, he seems like a great
So that's
guy.
the call sign story.
So
Gotta have a
okay,
lot
so
of
and then
balls to carry around that call sign.
Yeah, right?
when,
yeah,
stepping
absolutely.
aside.
Yeah, absolutely. So one more with the call sign. So kind of, at least from my experience, if you take your call sign to war, it usually doesn't change. But with you guys in the Air Force, like changing platform, that was automatically you were on the table for a call sign.
That is probably somewhat true, but for whatever reason, when I got up to Alaska, guys were calling me Magoo, and they kind of looked at me like, "Pork chop? That's a ridiculous call sign." So, and
Yeah.
I was not going to be honest. I know a couple of guys that have had two names, but it was not going to make me unhappy if it went away. So,
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys want to change it? Oh,
Hey, that's
darn.
I
No,
actually
really?
kind of like I liked pork chop, so they wouldn't, But yeah, exactly.
Smart man.
A little reverse
Smart man.
psychology on them. But and also too, the A-10 community, the F-15 community the A-10 was considered like the redheaded stepchild of the Air Force. And forgive me,
Right.
Beth. And so I'm seeing some red there, but no,
Oh no, it's
Okay,
dirty
here we go.
blonde. Don't worry.
and so we called, and from the A-10 side, we called them twin-tailed butt pirates. And
Yep.
Yeah.
Remember this from the last episode.
I put that down in my notes because it was so memorable. I'll never
Yep.
forget that.
Yeah, it's different
yes,
time.
yeah, exactly. So there was a lot of antagonism between the A-10 and the F-15, and so they were
Got
happy to say, "Oh, it's a stupid A-10 call sign. We're taking it away."
Yeah. So when you get back from Italy, are you back to Myrtle Beach for a while, and then obviously the pretty big event happens here in the
Got
near
back from
future.
Italy, and then just regular what we call CT training, day to day. And flying at Myrtle Beach was awesome because we had there were 4 or 5 ranges within 150, 200 miles north and south of the beach, and the terrain wasn't great for flying a hog because it was pretty flat out there. The wife and I drove down here to Florida about 3 weeks ago, and we passed by south of the border, which you may or may not be familiar with. And so
Oh, yeah.
south of the border is a
Oh, yeah.
tourist trap. and it has a massive tower that's like 150 feet high with a sombrero on the top, and we would use that as a navigational point. So I was just cracking up as I drove by south of the border last week because we used to fly over it all the time. So anyway, we'd fly. This was back at the end of the Reagan days, so we would typically fly 4 to 5 sorties a week, sometimes more, and we would do a range surge and fly 3 sorties, in the morning or the afternoon, and we'd go to a different range every time. And every time we went with 6 Blue Deaths, 6 BDUs, and 100 rounds. So all we did was dive bombing, 15 degree pops, 20 degree low angle, low drag, 30 degree dive bomb, and 100 rounds of 30 millimeter. And so looking back on it, it was kind of sport bombing, but it made us very good at what we did. Once we got to Desert Storm, it was, having the slop of 6 Mark 82s with, whatever it was, 30 milliseconds in between, we were near godlike because, you could put a BDU within 30 yards of a bus at points at gunnery range. So, and as I said, the A-10's bombing, as a bombing platform, it was pretty much a Stuka. There wasn't a lot helping the pilots. So it was all the airspeed, dive angle, and, being on the correct wire. So, and we got really good at it because that's all we did. So besides streaking.
Yes, reps and sets. You'll get really good at something.
Exactly. So we did that, just doing that, and then I got married first time in July of '90, and went on a honeymoon to St. Lucia and came back, I think, about late July. And I walked in on a Monday, and the intel officer said hello to him, and I said, "What's going on, Rundle?" And he said, "Oh, well, Saddam has invaded Kuwait." And I said, "Where the hell is that?" And I had no idea. I consider myself fairly knowledgeable on world geography, but I'd probably vaguely heard of Kuwait, but I didn't. I said, "Where is it exactly?" And he said, "Well, it's southeast of Kuwait, and he's looks like he's getting ready to invade." And I said, "Well, we do anything about it?" And he's, "Nah, we won't do anything about it." So it was probably less than a week later, and he shockingly crosses the border. Within I don't know, probably within 24 hours of them attacking, I think they crossed the border on like the 2nd of August, and we got a warning order from 9th Air Force headquarters up in Shaw within 48 hours to prepare 2 squadrons for deployment. Unbeknownst to us later on, I read in a book about it later on, was that General Horner was the 9th Air Force commander, a 3-star, and he did not like A-10s. His son was an A-10 pilot, and he called him brain dead. So, yeah, semi-jokingly, but
How dare he?
Semi-jokingly.
That's some deep hate.
He was of the kind of pointy-nosed mafia, and for years and years, the Air Force had been trying to get rid of the A-10. But so anyway, he did not initially have them going east, with all the jets going over in Desert Shield. And General Schwarzkopf said, "Where are my A-10s and my B-52s?" And he said, "Well, we don't need the A-10s." And he said, "Goddamn wrong." He said, "I want as many friggin' A-10s as you can send." And so we got a warning order within 48 hours. We were always called a C squadron. So every Air Force squadron, every Air Force wing typically has 3 squadrons. Myrtle Beach was pretty unique in that it was only a fighter wing. There was only 3 A-10 squadrons there, and that was it. There was no other tenant units on the base. And so there's always an A, a B, and a C squadron, which means the A and the B squadron will deploy first. The C squadron is typically left home. And we were the C squadron at the time, and when we got the warning order. And it just so happened that the B squadron commander was off base, I think, at the time, or coming back home from a trip or something. And our squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Rick McDowell, had a couple of combat tours as a Wizzo in F-4s in Vietnam. He'd actually been shot down by a MiG-21 and spent just about a year in the Hanoi Hilton. And when he came back in '72, he went to pilot training and was one of the first guys in the A-10. He was a fighter weapons school grad in the A-10, and he knew everything about the A-10. And so he was a very persuasive guy, and he went to the wing commander and said, "The Falcons are ready to go. We can go now." And they said, "Well, you're the C squadron." And he says, "I don't care." He says, "My guys are more experienced." He just did the whole full court press. How he did it to this day, I don't know, but he basically told the wing commander, "We're better than them, and we're going." So he picked us, and to this day, the squadron that did not go, the Demons, the 356th, are still unhappy about that. But
I'm sure. Yeah.
So anyway, we were told we were going to go. My sister squadron, the Panthers, the 353rd, they were picked to go first, and we watched them take off and deploy. So 24 jets, I think every squadron at the time was 24 UE, I think. So 24 jets took off, I think, from each squadron, fully loaded. It was the heaviest hog that I had ever flown 2 days later when I took off. Typically, an A-10 was 36,000 pounds in a training mode. And that day we took off with close to 50,000 pounds. So it was a heavy, heavy airplane. And we had at least,
What were you carrying?
we had 2 external fuel tanks at least. We might have had a third. I can't remember off the top of my noggin. I only flew a 3-bag jet a few times, and I think we may have had them on that ride. We were carrying multiple Maverick launchers on each wing, 2 AIM-9s, and an ECM pod, as well as I think a travel pod someplace. And so the external fuel tanks on the A-10 were actually F-111 fuel tanks. They decided they were not going to design a new one, and they just bolted them onto a hog. And it was massive. I mean, it looked like a friggin' boat. So if you put 2 on, it was one thing. 3, it was a pig. And so a typical takeoff roll on a hog for training was probably, I don't know, 3,500, 4,000 feet. But on that day, Myrtle Beach's runway was 9K, and we used probably 7,500 to 8,000 of it. I mean, it was a long takeoff roll. One of our sister squadron mates, actually another fellow UMass grad, we were watching him take off, and he got airborne, and he had lost an engine on takeoff. And it was the A-10 had very little what we call bold-face immediate action items. And one of them was if you lost an engine on a takeoff, you had to stomp on the rudder immediately because asymmetric thrust would cause the airplane to roll over.
Yeah. And
especially that heavily loaded. So we were taking off to the south that day, and there was probably at the end of the runway, there was a fence, less than 200, 300 yards, Highway 17, a driving range, and the beach. And so it was probably 350 yards from the end of the runway to the beach. He got airborne and made it to about 250 AGL when he lost his engine. The airplane would not climb, and he sat there thinking, oh my God, he could see people on the beach and he could see the driving range. And he decided it started to descend. So he hit the panic button and cleaned the airplane off of everything. So all the external fuel tanks fully loaded, landed about 50 yards out into the water. It was a summer day. And later on, I saw the Myrtle Beach Sun-Times newspaper said that the lifeguard said that people got out of the beach faster than if he'd yelled shark. Because, three huge external fuel tanks got these massive, like, battleship water plumes, like 80 feet in the air. And I remember somebody saying,
wow.
Was there nuclear weapons on that airplane? So, no. But so he staggered, he got down to about 80 AGL, and then he staggered away, and he came back and he landed on one engine. But that was notable from their takeoff. And then the next day we went back in after watching them take off. And that's when we got our order. We weren't sure yet if we were going to go. And 9th Air Force called and said the Falcons are going. So the squadron commander was happened to be a slow talking Alabamian, and he said, all right, get ready. We're going tomorrow. And it was like, holy shit, we're going to war. So, or so we think. And so said goodbyes, to the wife, and all the girls are, waiting as we were getting ready to go. And I packed the A-10. We had secret approach plates. We didn't know where we were going to go. They said, just launch and get over the ocean, beat your tanker. You'll find out about halfway over the Atlantic where you're going to go. And because there were so many jets going east, they actually didn't have enough tankers. The tankers were stopping at Atlantic Tanker Task Force, was at Lodges. So they were just shuttling back and forth, taking jets to Spain. It was insane. I mean, eventually, I think we ended up with about 1,200 tactical aircraft. Might have been more in theater. So, and it was just a massive effort. So anyway, jumped in the jet with all kinds of food and all these secret approach plates and whatnot. And because of delays and whatnot, we sat on the ramp for, I think, about an hour and a half till we actually launched. So I was number 6 in, which is really rare that you would be a 6 ship, but we were in a 6 ship. The plan was it would be a 3 ship on either side of the wing of a KC-135 or a KC-10. And they would do the navigating, and we just flew formation off of them. And so I was actually number 3. The boss was number 1, the squadron commander, assistant operations officer, major was number 2. We had 2 IPs as well as a squadron commander in the wing in the 6 ship, and then a buddy of mine happened to be from Puerto Rico, Mickey Moore, and he was number 6. So we blasted off. We hit our first tanker about 3.5 hours off the coast. I remember going up to Virginia Beach and hanging a right, and we got our first tanker. So we refueled. We were airborne. It was a 14.5. We refueled 7 times, and a hog at 17,000 feet. I think that was as high as we could get because the hog was not designed to go to high altitude. It hates to be at high altitude, and then you get all this friggin' weight. I think we talked about before the KC-10s. We had a KC-10 and they hated us because they had to do the toboggan maneuver to dive down so we could get through their bow wave, because otherwise, in max power, we didn't have afterburners, but max was full throttle. You're parked in the northwest corner and like, dude, I can't get to the boom. You're gonna have to the toboggan. So the bummer about the toboggan too, though, was that they had to put flaps down. So now you're going to the boom and the jet's shaking like a son of a bitch. But anyway, I think about the third time, and being a young dumb lieutenant, we recently had KY radios installed in our jets, and we didn't really know that much about them. We really hadn't used them at all yet. And I remember getting in the cockpit and, more dumb lieutenant tricks. I hear this, beep, 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 like the tone on the side. And I'm like, how the fuck do I get rid of this? So for 2.5 or 3 hours, I've got in the back, because I ain't gonna ask. I'm not gonna. How do you turn off the noise on a KY? I'd rather die than admit that I don't know this. And so somehow all you had to do, I think, was key it, and I finally keyed it, and like, oh shit, it went away, magic. So, but again, dumb lieutenant tricks. But the dumb lieutenant tricks followed as we finally get it's dark, and we're about halfway over the Atlantic, and the squadron commander, we had this one particular KC-135 came out of lodges, and we would do air-to-air attack, and I think at about 13 miles, the tanker would start his turn, and ideally he'd end up in front of us. And but again, with a hog, because we're so slow, it inevitably got gooned, and it would take a while to join up with them. So we finally joined up with them, and this particular KC-135 said, my boom is malfunctioning. It's streaming fuel, and we can't control it, but you guys can try it if you want. Now, in peacetime, we would never have done this. But the squadron commander said, God damn it, we're going to war, we'll give it a shot. So he went up, and I remember looking down at him, and it was a pitch black night, and you could see just looking at the boom, there was just fuel, streaming out of it it was like going through like a rainstorm. And the A-10's receptacle's right in front of the pilot. So he got on with some difficulty, and he's a real, let's say, I'd describe Rick McDowell, leader of men. You'd follow him anywhere, and we did. You didn't want to cross him, and he was extremely low key. So he lowballed everything. So he said it was a little difficult. Be careful, So the assistant operations officer was a crusty major, good guy, and he got on with more difficulty, and it seemed to get worse. So he got his fuel, and we were taking, I don't know, and we had, I think a hog carried something like 18,000 pounds, actually 20 or 22,000 pounds with the external fuel tanks. So it could take a while to get 8 or 10,000 pounds. You're talking 7, 8, 9 minutes. And so anyway, he finally got his gas with difficulty. As he came off, he said, I could tell, and he said to me, we had 4 radios in the A-10. So, looking back on it, we would have what I call now trucker comm, having flown the Eagle. We had, 2 UHF, a VHF, and a Fox mic. So the intra-flight freak, he actually said to me, be careful, Mikey, it sucks. So I'm like, oh, perfect. So I get down and I'll never forget. This particular KC-1, it was a 135. It was not lit up well anyway. And so as I got behind to pre-contact, it was like going through a snowstorm, just a driving rainstorm. And, there was we did not have a windshield wiper, if I can recall. Maybe we did. It's been so long now, but it was lame anyway. Whatever we had it was like air you could blow up or something like that. It was just like brutal. So I could barely see the bottom of the boom. And then finally, when I got to it and I was able to hook up, it still was coming up over the top of the canopy. So we did not really use the director lights on the bottom of the tanker like other jets, an F-16 or an F-15 would do. We just kind of looked at it and just tried to stay in position. And I couldn't see the tanker really well at all. I could just see kind of like an apparition of it. And so one of the things you want to do is check your fuel gauge to make sure that you're getting gas. And the fuel gauge on the A-10 was down in front of your right knee. So just in the time it took me to look down like that, and I looked back up, and the tanker was gone. I literally couldn't see. I could see some lights, but I couldn't see the boom, and I couldn't see anything. And I just sat there thinking, oh, shit. And, there's probably about an 8-foot or 10-foot wide by 8-foot box that you're supposed to be in. And I had no idea where I was in that box, but I knew that I was hooked up. So I thought, okay, if I just hold this position, and the boomer is watching me too. So, but everybody's pressing because we're going to war. So I sat there thinking, okay, I'm just going to hold this position and hopefully I'll see. And right, all of a sudden I heard this awful metal on metal screeching, like sound. So I must have reached a limit without realizing it. And the boomer being, because we're all pressing and going to war, he must have allowed me to get to the limit and without yanking the thing out. So he let it stay in. So it was like a brute force disconnect and it yanked across my nose. And it was bad anyway. Now it was brutally, the fuel was just coming out of the son of a bitch. So he says, go back to pre-contact. So I went back to pre-contact and all of a sudden the pilot came up and he said, hey, we're going to have to go back to the lodges. We just lost our left AC bus, blah, 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 blah. I was like, holy shit, what the hell just happened? So I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, did I fuck this up?
Did I?
And oh, by the way, it doesn't matter anyway. And the next thing I heard was the squadron commander saying, I'm going to need a tanker here in exactly 31 minutes, or we're going to be diverting to Gander Bay, Newfoundland, which was 1,250 miles away at that point. And I thought, if I got to go to Gander Bay, Newfoundland with Rick McDowell, he is going to kick my fucking ass, whether I was wrong, whether I screwed up or not, because the squadron's going to war and he ain't with it. So I was terrified, just thinking, oh my God, please let the tanker get here. And no kidding, I'll never forget seeing it was about 20 miles away when I could see the lights. And they said, we're scrambling one. We were probably 800 miles west of the Azores when that happened. And it launched immediately. And it got there right at about 31 minutes. I mean, it was damn close. So he circles down in front of us and he says, go ahead and pork drop. And I'm like, oh, fuck, here we go. So it was the tightest refueling I've ever had because I couldn't pork it away. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, 4, 5, and 6 have less gas than me. And so they're really digging my act. And so I finally get my gas, move to the side. 4 and 5 gets their gas. 6, my buddy, the lieutenant, can't get on the boom for some reason. And I'm sitting there watching it, and I can tell you got 2 IPs in the squadron commander, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? So he already did. I know he had to do the toboggan, but anyway, he's like, I can't get there. So all the IPs are like, check this, check that, check this, and all of a sudden somebody says, check speed brakes, and all of a sudden she says, 6 is good. So his boards were out. Why, I don't know. And it was slow. He couldn't get
since Myrtle Beach, his boards are out.
Exactly. So why, I have no idea. I mean, the Hog is a speed brake anyway, and it's with all that shit on it. But he had his boards out. So the 2 lieutenants doing stupid lieutenant shit, but I'll never forget. He said 6 is good. So he gets his gas, and we finally go through. We go hit another refueling before the sun comes up. I remember the flight doc had told us we all had a test for Benzagen, the speed pills, and so I had that in the cockpit, and he had said if you get tired, take one. If you get tired again, take another one because you're going to go down hard. So we had taken off with 4 cells of 6 with 30 minutes in between, but because of the way the tanker rejoins had gone, by the time the sun came up, we were about 400 miles, 500 miles off the coast of Spain, and all the cells were within about 10 miles of each other. And the last tanker rejoin did not go well with the air-to-air attack end. And we were doing it across the circle, 2-circle fight, with this KC-10. And the squadron commander, probably 39, 40 at the time, maybe his eyes were getting old, I don't know. He was not seeing it. So he's got these 2 IPs saying, boss, it's right 2 o'clock for 10:30. Copy that. And he's still gooning it, and he still can't see it. Boss, it's right 3 o'clock for 15 miles. Copy that. And he's not. So finally, one of some IP says, boss, and he goes, God damn it, I've got enough help. So we were all going to flame out because nobody was going to say a fucking thing to Rick McDowell at that point. So finally, we get on, and we're getting our gas, and as that happens, because we were just basically doing this circle in the middle of the Atlantic, all 4 cells join up, and the boss said, why don't we just all join up and we'll just altitude deconflict. So the last time I got gas, I don't know, 300 or 400 miles off the coast of Spain, I'll never forget, as I was going to the pre-contact position, we were on the low tanker. There was another one about 150, 200 feet above to my right, another one above him, and another to the right. It was a B-17 combat box. I mean, we had, 4 tankers and 24 hogs. It was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And I mean, I'm like you. What I would recommend to you, Taco, is as you're kind of getting, you still got some time left in your career, but not a hell of a lot of time. Start to smell the roses because you're not going to be able to do this, at some point.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That was one of those moments where I was like, wow, I need to take a snapshot of this because this is amazing. So finally, we get our gas, and we're 300 miles off the coast of Spain. We don't know where we're going. And the squadron commander calls, and, Seville approach, and we got some message from the tanker, and they said, "Hey, you're going to Morone." So, all right, Morone, Spain. So we look at it as a tack and blah 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 blah. So the boss comes up, and our call sign was Sail 11. I'll never forget it. And he comes up with his slow Alabamian drawl. Seville approach. Good morning. Sail 11. Flight of 24. 300 miles, 200 miles to the west. Yeah.
Say that
So he
again.
comes back and says, say it again. So he tries to go slow, much like the Italian guy. He says, Sail 11. And he says, I'm sort of unreadable. So he says to 6, Mickey from Puerto Rico, he goes, God damn it, Mickey, tell him what we want. So he talks to them in Spanish, and they said, you are clear direct from Morone. Take a left-hand turn 070 for 235 miles. So off we go. And so we get there, and the boss decides we're going to do a 24-ship drag. And so we end up, dragging. We had a 24-mile chain, and he turns to final. Morone is an XB-52 base that has a 13,000-foot runway. And so he's going to land. We're landing to the south. And as he touches down, and everybody's tired. We've been airborne for 14 hours. And I took two go pills because I was starting to get tired. So I am wired. And so he lands, and about halfway down, they said, can you make the first high speed? And he says, absolutely. So the number 2 guy, the assistant operations officer, the major, he had landed long and hot because he's thinking it's a 13,000-foot runway. I don't need to make that. So he's long and hot in a heavy hog, and the boss makes the high speed. The number 2 guy stands up on 2 wheels to make the corner. And, I'm forewarned. So I land on brick 1 and I make the high speed fine. But out of the 24 jets, because dudes were just tired and they were landing long and hot, 8 or 10 dudes had to go to the hot brakes penalty box for a half hour. Because the A-10 brakes were not very good. Again, the whole airplane was a friggin' speed brake. But you rarely had to stomp on brakes in the hog, and they did, and they paid for it by extending their 14.5 to a 15.0. So they were not pleased, and gave the boss some shit, because in the Air Force or in the Navy, in flight integrity, you do what the leader does, no matter what is going on. So everybody had to make the high speed, which was pretty tight. And so anyway, we get to the shocks. We actually had to pull 2 dudes bodily out of the cockpit because they were so exhausted and so tired. And we'd been in the airplane for about 16, 17 hours at that point. So we get out, got some chow, go back, talk about it. I get that, like, Magoo, you jackass, you almost became a pork chop. You almost became a unicorn, blah, 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 blah. And I still take shit to this day. I would not have told that story, but I'm telling it because of integrity, because I know we're going to Annapolis for a mini reunion in September. And inevitably, there's one dude that always mentions it. Oh, you almost broke the boom. Yeah, okay, fine. So if I don't tell that story, it's gonna. What's that?
Good man.
Good.
Good
It's
man.
integrity. It's
Yeah.
good.
You gotta do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta own it. You just gotta own it.
And we all goon
Good
shit.
Now you've said it.
It's one of those things that you can't, gloss over in your own cockpit because everybody saw it. So anyway, we were kind of rehashing the whole mission and whatnot. And as I am now, I'm just yammering. We're talking it out. And dudes start dropping off one by one. So we're supposed to launch within, I think, 19 or 20 or 24 hours later to go to Saudi Arabia. And so I'm one of the last ones yammering. And I'd taken a no-go pill. I took a sleeping pill, did nothing. And I took a second one. I was out for 18 hours.
Oh, God.
Slept for 18 hours. We all did. We were all exhausted. We get up, got some food, jump in the jet. And this time I'm in the second cell, squadron commander's up ahead. And so as I'm taxiing, I start to have problems with one of my external fuel tanks. It's not going to feed. Normally it would not go. And it looks like it's not going to feed. But the boss is up ahead. We radio up ahead. And all he said was one word, press. So I'm like, okay. So I'm going to have one less fuel tank, which means I'm going to be refueling a lot more. So whatever. So anyway, I'm sitting there ready to get armed, and there's a massive rain squall going on, and then suddenly a lightning storm, and there's lightning hitting all around the field. Now, normally, you would never do anything, but God damn it, we're going to war. So we had about, in the A-10, or typically in the Air Force, they'll hook into the airplane, unlike in the Navy, we're typically doing hand signals with the ground crew. And the arming crew would hook in with each jet. So I got armed. My buddy next to me, another lieutenant, was getting armed, and I was watching the ground crew, and all of a sudden I heard this bang, and I look over to my left, and I've seen lightning up close. I've been hit in an Eagle twice. Lightning is about 3 or 4 feet wide, and it's more like a deep blue. So anyway, it hit one of the ground crewmen, And I thought, my buddy said, that fucker's dead.
Jeez.
And there was a 6-pack Air Force truck. The other 4 dudes ran to the truck and drove away, and this poor bastard's lying on the ground. So,
Oh my God.
so they drag him off. We don't know his status. He lived. He was just winged. But they dragged him off, and we launched. And then I had a problem with something else on the airplane. I can't remember what it was. Something with my APU or something like that. So again, normally something you'd turn back for. And radio up to the boss, press. Okay. So off we go. And this one was a 12-5 to Saudi Arabia. And we flew down the Mediterranean, over Crete, and just north of Tripoli at the time. Gaddafi was the guy in charge. We had our radar warning receivers on. I could see strokes from, SAM sites well to our south. But so anyway, we passed in Saudi Arabia. There was our sister squadron had the day before, they had some trouble where one dude fell asleep making a left-hand turn at the Nile, and he beamed off. He was at the end of the squadron, and he beamed off. And they were like, "Where's Pokey?" And it's like, "Pokey." And they're screaming at him on the radio because he's just, And the Hawk did not have an autopilot at that time, so how he stayed level, I don't know. But he actually fell asleep for like 5 minutes, so they were screaming and yelling at him. They had a much harder time than us. They actually had, at night, they had one dude who was disoriented, one of the 3 guys on the wing, and an IP was telling this guy, "You are straight and level." They had a terrible case of the leans. "You're straight and level, blah, 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 blah. And I'm, on your wing, just fly below." And all of a sudden, unbeknownst to him, a dude on the right side, on the other side of the tanker, got disoriented. He went up and over the 135, ended inverted in front of the other 3. And this guy sees that. They all see it. And so he screams at him and he says, "2, you are his wingman. You're straight and level. 6, you're inverted, roll out." What had happened, this one dude, he had fuel come into the cockpit, and he had massive fuel, or this actually a different dude, but anyway, they had terrible problems. One guy considered jumping out because he was so sick from the fuel fumes. So it was kind of an epic trip. So anyway, we make a left-hand turn, heading to Saudi Arabia. They tell us, again, we don't know where we're going. And finally, about 2 hours prior to Saudi Arabia, they said you're going to King Fahd International, which was a half-finished international airport about 20 miles northwest of Dhahran, major city on the East Coast. So we go there. It did have a TACAN, I think, like Special Forces or somebody would get in. They have like a portable TACAN, and they set that up for us at the time. So we land 2 13,000-foot parallel runways, massive, like mosque-looking terminal off to the west side of the field, and not a lot of finished stuff. And there were a lot of third country nationals that were building this place. They had like a camp off to the east. So I landed there. It was 7:30 in the morning when I landed. And our sister squadron dudes are waiting on the ramp, and I popped the canopy, and it was 103 degrees at 8 in the morning, and my 75-degree cockpit, and it was like, holy shit! And all the ground crew had not only like the Army tank commander goggles, but they also had like sand wraps around their face because it was blowing sand. They looked just like Sandmen from Star Wars, and So anyway, had this lieutenant colonel from my sister squadron, and he comes, I looked over and he says, "Welcome to Saudi Arabia. It's 130 degrees at 8 in the morning." All right, cool. So he says, "Get your shit. We're going to the Tactical Operations Center. There's some shit going on." So I barely get my stuff, do the forms, and I end up at this pretty big building where the other squadron's there and the wing leadership and whatnot. And I'm there, we're making maps, which were really, there wasn't much terrain there, but just for, all of our tactical maps for up in Kuwait and southern Iraq, because it looks like the balloon's going to go up pretty soon, because Saddam had invaded with 3 Republican Guard armored divisions. The Kuwaitis fought back for about 2 or 3 days, but they had a small air force, and then they hightailed it south, and they started the Free Kuwait Air Force with their remaining A4s and whatever the hell, F1s I think they had. So it was a quick fight. They were just overwhelmed. And so there was 3 divisions sitting on the Kuwaiti border, Kuwaiti-Saudi border, ready to strike at any time. And it looked like they were going to. So we're sitting there and I'm making maps, and all of a sudden there's this big commotion, and an intel weenie comes running out, and he says, "A U.S. Navy ship's been fired upon. We're at war." I was like, holy fuck, I just got here. So it was this whole like stepping up of getting ready for this, and we were in that state for about 30 minutes till they come out and said, "Nope, false alarm." It didn't happen. So there was a lot of shit like that happened until finally we just kind of settled that we got into our living area, which was the third camp. We kicked all the third country nationals out. They all hightailed it, and so we got there pretty good, like double wide trailer, about, I don't know, 50 yards long, center aisle and, or hallway down. And then we packed 4 dudes to a room with bunk beds. So we had all of our shit, all of our chem gear, there was barely any, room to move. We had one particular dude in my room who stank like shit. So I had to live with him for the next 7 months, but a good dude nonetheless. But he always smelled like eggs. I don't know why. But so anyway, so we settle down, and pretty soon things get calmed down. Our base starts to build up over time. Saudi Arabia was not really, they had probably, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 tactical jets. They had Tornadoes, F-15s, but they did not have a lot in the way of military operating areas. Now, Saudi Arabia is a big country, but they were not ready for the massive influx of Air Force and Marine tactical jets. And so they were just overwhelmed. So what was it? We got there in August. The war started in January. So in the 4.5, 5 months till the war started, I probably flew only 40 times, maybe 45.
Oh, wow.
Because initially there were no MOAs, and they were like, you guys can't fly because we don't know where to put you. So we flew a couple of missions just to get local area, oriented. I remember being out in the wastes of the inner part of the Saudi desert. I was flying with my leader. We paired up with what we called combat pair flight leads, so that you didn't have to brief all the time. He would brief all options for, whatever type of BAI or, CAS or whatever mission we're going to do. And so that when you reported in for the night's combat sorties later on, you didn't really have to brief much other than, let's jump on the jets and go, because everything was standard. So I flew with him constantly. And this guy was a guy named Snort Givens, a senior captain at the time. He was the wing electronic combat pilot, real smart guy, good hard driver. And later went to fighter weapons school, became a Thunderbird, and he retired as a 1-star. And so real sharp guy, very aggressive. And so we were pretty well paired together. It was interesting to see the personalities of the different combat pairs. There were some leaders that had to plead with their wingmen to arm their bombs or to make a bomb run. It was really, I was shocked. I didn't realize till the end of the war, really, that a lot of that was going on, that there was a lot of different personality issues. He and I were really well meshed, and we did well together. So we were doing a training mission out in the middle of the desert, and there was nothing out there. And it makes no sense, but the A-10 did not have a rad alt. So we're raging along at 80 or 100 feet over the desert. Why? Because we could. And I'm just looking at typically we flew I think you had a qualification to go from 500 to 400 to 300. And we almost never went below 3 legally. But out here in the desert, we could do whatever the hell we wanted. So I remember I had the sun over my right shoulder so I could see my shadow. And I was probably at about 100 or 120 feet. And my leader was in tactical about a mile away. And there was literally, I can't really tell my altitude beyond that because there's just nothing out there. And he says, what's that? And I look up, and he says, between us is this little black splotch. And as we get closer to it and pass it, I realize it's a pile of tires, hundreds and hundreds of rubber tires, 50 miles from nowhere. And why they're there, I have no idea. And there was all kinds of shit like that in Saudi Arabia. That was just like, what is this? Why is this here? So we raged along, we're continuing along, we see something else, and we see a tanker truck, not with the drivable part, but just a tanker truck next to a bunch of Bedouin tents. So Bedouins would take water out into the middle of the desert, say, this is a nice place in the desert, and we're gonna camp here. And they were 80 miles from nowhere. So it was just a bizarre place. So anyway, we started to build up over time, and as we're doing a hell of a lot of flying, and we were bored shitless because there was just nothing to do. And so a lot of, they got us weights. The Air Force, it was amazing to me. The Air Force had a air transportable carpentry unit. So they would show up with wood and instructions as to how to make a chest of drawers. And dudes, because they were bored, they started to make chests of drawers where you could push a wood button and this Coke would roll down on a thing out of a fridge because, they were just bored shitless. So we had all these wood furniture that dudes were making. Why? Because they could. The food was terrible at first. We were at what we call the Saudi Chow Hall. And the 101st Brigade of the 101st showed up, 101st Airborne. They eventually had 800 helicopters on the west side of the field. And that was just 101st.
Wow.
And then an Army military intelligence unit with OV-1 Mohawks showed up. They lived in tents between the runways. There were 12 AC-130 gunships, a bunch of C-130s, and then more A-10 started to show up. So we had our 2 squadrons from the beach, They decided 2 squadrons from England showed up, a squadron from Alexandria, Louisiana, and finally a reserve squadron from New Orleans and an A-10 unit. So by the time the war kicked off, we had 144 A-10s at King Fahd International. We called it Hog Heaven. And it was just unbelievable. But again, with all the helicopters and whatnot, there was airplanes everywhere. And on top of that, there were C-130s and C-5s and 141s landing every 20 minutes with, massive influx of stuff, just supplies and whatnot.
Yeah.
So it was really wild to watch this build up over time. But again, we were bored. So we had a guy in the squadron had a buddy who worked in Wall Street. And he would lobby companies to say, hey, my buds are in the desert. You need to send them your shit free. So he got mail order steaks, somehow put on a C-5. He knew some dudes in the Air Force, like chief master sergeants that controlled everything in the Air Force. And he somehow got like 80 or 100 fantastic mail order steaks loaded in a couple of, just little portable freezer kind of thingies, coolers with dry ice. And he said they're going to land in Dhahran at some point on this day. So my bud goes to Dhahran, and he's watching every C-5 come in, and he runs up to the back and peeks in the back. Hey, you guys got a cooler? Like, finally, after about the third or fourth one, yeah, we do. Meanwhile, he meets a Royal Air Force pilot, a Tornado F-3 driver, and they're talking. And he says, what do you got in the coolers, mate? And he said, we got 100 mail order steaks. He says, no shit. He says, when they were in downtown Dhahran in apartments, the Royal Air Force, they don't fuck around. So they've got apartments. We're in friggin', trailers. And so they said, tell you what, we've got booze. You guys got fucking booze? We were trying to sneak booze through the mail and all this kind of shit. You guys would put it in scope bottles and all this kind of stuff. And because you couldn't, rule number 1 was no booze in Saudi Arabia. So, which sucked because it was a dry war. So, at least to begin with. So the deal was we would,
at least to begin with. More on that later.
So exactly. So we would trade them steaks. They were going to invite us to Dhahran in their apartments. And they also had phones. Rule number 2 was you can't use the phones. So I only got to speak to my new bride once, maybe 40 days after I got to Saudi Arabia. Every unit would show up. The whole unit would get like a half an hour. The DSN connection was terrible. You're like, honey, love you. It would go, and that was it. So they were like, you got phones and booze? That's awesome. Yeah, we'll meet up. So we bring our steaks about a week later. And these guys they have a pool. They got their own pool. They had a banner that said 25 Squadron, 1918, 1991 with a Sopwith camel on the side and all this shit, And so they bring out, and they had a waiter named Vincent, a Saudi Arabian waiter. And they're like, Vincent, 2 poached eggs and a spritzer. Thank you so much. And this guy would run off and get 2 friggin' poached eggs and a spritzer. And he'd come back. So, and we're sitting there like, where's the booze? They're like, oh, we got to that. Where's the steaks? So we trade the steaks. We're, not the steaks. And all of a sudden they bring out the booze, and it's homemade shit. So they've been making this stuff because you can't get booze in the Saudi Arabia. We're like, homemade? Are you shitting me? So they start drinking it, and they get hammered. We start drinking it, and we're getting stomach aches. It was terrible. But they literally, we're singing all the, Sidewinder up the ass of an A4 Skyhawk, early in the morning, drunk as fools here. But, we're drinking with them. We're like, this is not happening. So we had a great time with them, but it was terrible, fake booze. And so we had a couple of dudes try to make beer that did not go well. I'll never forget them putting the yeast in and trying to cap it as fast as they could, and the shit going everywhere. They broke so many bottles. But one dude found the recipe for wine, unbeknownst to me, until New Year's Eve. For more on that later. So
toilet wine.
Yeah, toilet wine, exactly. And but I'll never forget one of the dudes who was trying to make the beer. His dad had been an artillery officer in Korea. And when we first landed, and we got some mail, his first mail from his dad, and it said, I'll never forget, he read it. He says, by now you are at your new squadron spaces, and you have built a new squadron bar. If you do not have flowing alcohol with dancing women on the bar, you have most definitely arrived at the wrong war. So we had arrived at the wrong war. So anyway, we flew a little bit more and whatnot, and it got very depressing. Holidays went by. We're gonna be going home by Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving goes by. It was just very boring. Nothing to do.
Yeah.
So finally, the army came to our squadron, or got all the 7 squadron commanders together for the 354th Provisional Fighter Wing, and they said, we think we got pretty good coverage by day. What can you do for us at night? And 6 of the 7 squadron commanders turned their heads and said, "Oh, we don't do that. We're a day VFR airplane." And my squadron commander said, "The Falcons will do it." And he had, out of his combat time in Vietnam, about half of it was at night. He had like 300 or 400 night combat hours in Vietnam. And so he pretty much volunteered us. He says, "We'll do it." So he came back. He had unbeknownst to us, he had a meeting with the weapons officer. And he said, "I think by using the infrared Maverick is kind of like a poor man's FLIR." We had a screen about yay big for our Mavericks in the cockpit, that we can come up with ways to look at a set of INS coordinates where tanks might be. And, on the billiard table that is Kuwait, at night, with the tank engines retaining their heat, we should be able to see him. So he had a meeting, and we near mutinied. We're like, "Boss, are you insane? That's not what we do." But he said, I think we can do it." And as a side note, when I first showed up to the Falcons, and I had found out that he had spent a year in a Hanoi Hilton, he never talked about being shot down. He never talked about it very, very much. And a couple of lieutenants deigned to try and discuss it one day. So he started talking about it a little bit, and he said, "I was in 2 different F4 units. One was good, one was bad. Went from the good to the bad one. And one day we're going up north in Route Pac 6, and he said they flew like a loose, what they call fluid twos, where you'd have the element leaders, and then the wingmen would fly pretty tight to the leaders." And he said, "You were flying, doing station keeping rather than looking for bad guys. It was a stupid way to fly, but that's the way they did." So I was trying to get them to do that, but they weren't going to listen to my, poor young dumbass First Lieutenant Wizzo. So sure enough, he said all of a sudden one day, we're about to hit the target area, and the right engine is on fire, and I see MiG-21 go by at high speed. And he's telling this story, and he said he'd hit us with an atoll, and they would do a supersonic high to low run, one pass, and they'd run away. So being the young dumbass that I was again, I said, "Boss, did you see the MiG-21? And he says, "Well, God damn it, pork chop, if I'd seen the motherfucker, I wouldn't have got shot down now, would I have?" So once again, dumb lieutenant tricks. Never pass up an opportunity to shut the fuck up. So anyway, so he volunteered us. It was not popular, but we started to train for it when we were flying more training missions. We did not have NVGs. The airplane was not designed for it. At that time, I don't think anybody tactically used them. We borrowed some from an Apache unit across the way. Dudes got disoriented. They were not, designed for our helmets. They were not high fidelity. They were not going to work. We tried to come up with formations where we used, combat running lights. He was flying with the assistant operations officer one night in like a wedge formation, about a mile and a half, with combat running lights on. And the major looked up and he called the squadron commander. He said, "Boss, you're in a dive. Roll out." And the squadron commander looked at his own instruments, thinking, "Holy shit, I've got into an insidious dive." And he says, "I'm straight and level." And he looks over at him and he sees the major diving. He goes, "You're diving. Roll out." So there's a lot of that shit. And finally, we came up with was 2 to 4 nautical mile air-to-air attacking and trail, going from INS point to INS point. And that was the best we could do. And it worked pretty well. So in training anyway. So anyway, approaching, there was all the political shit going on. They were saying if Saddam doesn't withdraw by January 15th, we're probably going to attack. And so New Year's rolls around, and so everybody's kind of bummed out because we're still there. It's New Year's, and the squadron commander was willing to party a little bit. We'd befriended some Army nurses, or he had, and he invited some Army nurses from a MASH type unit to party with us on New Year's Eve. So I'm in my room and I'm like reading a book or something because I'm just depressed. I'm missing the wife back home. And all the bros are out in the hallway partying as the ball's getting ready to drop. And some of the dudes are drinking their own, this wine and whatnot. And this massive party's going on. So finally the door opens to my room and they're like, "Pork chop, get out of here. God damn it. The ball's about to drop." So I go out in the hallway and I said, "Oh, what the hell?" So I go in the hallway and all of a sudden somebody hands me, I'll never forget, thrust me a bottle of this wine that Judge Wapner, we had a guy, Dave Wapner, his call sign was Judge. Shocking. Yeah.
Nice.
Good so Judge, and he was a short little dude. He's pork up, and he hands me a bottle of his wine. And I looked at it and I said, "Well, this is going to be like the RAF shit, but I'll give it a shot." So I slugged back. It was probably about 2/3 full. and I slugged back, a bunch of it. And for whatever reason, nobody ever took the bottle from me. So you see one dude have one of those old video cameras, and he's filming this for all posterity. I can never run for public office. So because the next 2 or 3 hours, you see the transformation of Pork Jock from, dude missing his wife to, hey, to completely off the walls, as this shit is potent as hell. So I'm drinking like a fish, and you see me, I'm like jumping up on somebody's bunk bed and whatnot. And like, so finally, when Pork Chopper Magoo gets really drunk, I have this incessant need to either take a shower or a bath. So I went to the shower for whatever reason. They filmed me. I'm naked as a jaybird at the bottom of the shower, crumpled, near passed out. They finally bring me off to my room, and the last thing I remember seeing was, dudes are hanging out drinking. And as I'm lying on the floor, I see this red shit come out of my mouth. It's the wine, and so they're like laughing at me. You drunk dumbass. So they throw me into bed, and but before that had happened, my combat pair is trying to get me some air. So he says, "Mike, come on out. We're gonna get you some air." So he brings me to the end of the trailer, and there was a 10-foot high cement wall, and there were Air Force SPs and towers like Hogan's Heroes Guard towers outside of that. And it's like 2 a.m. or whatever the hell it was. And I'm doing what we call compressor stalls, Beth. So I'm, just salivating like a son of a bitch. And he's trying to get me some air. And all of a sudden, the SP in the guard tower says, "Has that man been drinking?" And of course, being the drunk jackass that I am, I'm like, "Fuck you." So my buddy's like, "Shut up, Mike." So I'm like, "Fuck you." So this is going on. And finally, he brings me back in. They put me back to bed. And I'm thinking, and I pass out, stone cold out of it, or so I think. So the next morning I wake up 6:30 in the morning, sunrise in Saudi Arabia. Everybody's passed out. I get up and I walk in the hallway, and there's about 3/4 of an inch of standing water in the hallway, and there's water in other dudes' room, but everybody's snoring passed out. So I go out on the deck, and our sister squadron was across the way. They were not allowed to party because their squadron commander was not allowing it. He didn't allow them to drink. So they're reading novels and out on the deck. We had made this deck. Some dude had come up with this brilliant way of engineering a recycling water hot tub of sandbags. So that thing is running, and I'm here in the water. And there was about 20 yards away from, or 10 yards away from the trailer, and there was a bunch of trailers all around. There was one of those high-rise fire extinguisher thingies where you pull the hose out. And I'd been there for 5.5 months and never seen anybody screw with the goddamn thing. So, but I look over at it, and the hose is pulled out completely. There's like 120 feet of hose. There's puddles everywhere, and the Panthers have been kind of looking at me. And I said, what's the deal? And they said, "You don't know." And I said, "You really don't know?" And I said, "Who did this?" And they said, "You did, jackass. You found a second wind at about 5 in the morning and ran out, turned that fucking thing on full speed, ran through the trail and fired it into everybody's room." So, and I had zero recollection, blackout night. And I walked back inside and said to one of my buddies, "I'm like, dude, you went on a tear at like 5 a.m. So I'm like, "Why didn't you guys punch the shit out of me?" They said, "Because you were hilarious." So, but again, no recollection. So that was Pork Chop's New Year's Eve. And finally, about the 10th or the 12th rolls around, and we get a visit from General Glosson. And actually, long before that, we got a visit from General Schwarzkopf. Right as we got there, when Desert Storm was Desert Shield was in its infancy, and he was going to visit us. And the squadron commander said, "General Schwarzkopf's going to visit us. He's going to come in. He's going to say some shit. There's going to be 30 reporters. He's going to say some stuff about defending the kingdom. He's going to ask you if you have any questions. You will not have any questions. He's a busy man. We're busy. We got shit to do. We let him go on his way. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." So I'm standing with Snort, my buddy, the one that I fly with, and he has a long lineage running back to ancestors fighting in the Civil War on the Confederate side. He's a good old, he's from Kentucky, and just total madman when it comes to everything military. So he's standing next to me. The general comes in. He gives a speech. "We're here for the defense of the kingdom, and that's it. Well, what if Saddam attacks? We'll worry about that when it comes. But we're here for the defense of the kingdom." And he kept hammering, "Defense of the kingdom, defense of the kingdom." So finally, "Any questions, gentlemen?" The squadron commander looks around and says, "No, sir. That's all we got. Thanks for the visit." And he says, "All right, thank you very much." And he starts to turn around. All the cameras go down, the lights go down, and he gets about halfway to the door. The reporters of all are now not at the ready. And Snort says, "God damn it, General, when Saddam comes up, we're going to kick his fucking ass." And And Schwarzkopf turns around, and the true soldier in him comes out, and he goes, "You're goddamn fucking right. We're gonna kick this." And all of a sudden, the cameras come up, the lights go on, but nobody's filmed yet. There was one dude. I actually found some documentary on the hog, and that some dude filmed Snort saying that, but I can't find it. But anyway, all the mainstream NBC, ABC, they didn't get it up. But all of a sudden, he sees the cameras, and he goes, "But we're here strictly for the defense of the kingdom. Thank you very much." And off he goes. So anyway, Glosson was the one-star that was the operations officer running. He was going to run the air war for General Schwarzkopf, the three-star. And he, about 48 hours before, unbeknownst to us, the war is going to start on the 17th. So he shows up about the 15th. All 350 or so hog drivers from 7 units get locked into a massive hangar. There's SPs all around it. They lock the doors. He lands on a C-21 with the staff, comes running up on a stage, and he says, "Gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that unless the political situation improves, we are going to be at war within 48 hours. I've brought the air tasking order for the first 3 days. When I was a captain in Operation Rolling Thunder in 1968 in F-100, I had no idea what the big picture was. The war was being run from Washington. We lost a lot of guys, and we decided, my group of gents that were Vietnam fighter pilots have decided we're not going to do that. So you guys are going to be in the know about the whole thing from the get-go. You're going to know not only what your role is going to be in the first few days, I'm going to tell you where the 117s are going, what targets they're going to strike, blah, 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 blah." So we're sitting and listening to this going, holy fuck, this is happening. And so he gave about a 45-minute speech and told us what our role was going to be. The hog was not going to have too much of a role in the first couple of days. We did have, actually, my leader, Snort, was a wingman with a weapons officer, and he flew, it can be debated, but I believe he flew the first ever hog combat mission against what was called a Trappist scatter, which was like a radar communications listening post on the Iraqi border that was part of their air defense system. And they went up and strafed and bombed that thing for 35 fucking minutes. They had like a 23 millimeter gun. They took it out on the first pass, and they just ruined that fucking place. It was impressive to watch the film. So anyway, that was pretty eye-opening. Was holy shit, this is happening. And so we were not really going to be fragged to do anything. The war was supposed to start at like 2:35 in the morning, Saudi time. And about 6 hours before the war kicked off, we had about 16 F-16s from I think it was from Doha. They staged into our base, and they were going to take off and go attack Ali Al Salim in Kuwait, which was only about 180 miles north of us. And so, not being on the schedule to fly at all, we basically got to have a grandstand seat to watch these guys take off. And so they took the runway as four ships, which was, you never see that. And they were loaded with 4 Mark 84s apiece, which is extremely rare for a Viper because he's bingo at takeoff. But, their target was 160 miles away, so they could afford to carry him. And we actually had like these grandstand seats about 80 feet from the end of the runway. So we're sitting there in our mop chemical suits because there was a worry about chemical attack. And these things were awful. They made us take these tablets called pyridostigmine, which was like an anti-chemical, thing that was supposed to fight against it. We'd been taking them for 3 days. All it did was make you fart like a son of a bitch. So we farted so much that you could not smell. It was just flatus coming out of our ass. There was no smell because we were farting so goddamn much. It was awful. So, and the chemical suit had charcoal in them, and they were hot and sweaty and whatnot. And we've been living in these things for 2 days, for like a day. They're awful. So we're sitting in our Mach 4 chemical suits with our, masks at the ready in case there's an attack. And we watched all 16 of those dudes take off. And when the last one took off, and his afterburner went outside, we sat there. There's probably about 10 of us, and we were completely silent. And one of my buddies said, "It's 2:37 a.m. The first T-LAM just hit Baghdad." And I was like, holy fuck. So there was just this really kind of like deep moment. And one of my other buddies, about 10 seconds later, as the last burner, was unlit as the Viper went out of sight, he says, "Godspeed, motherfuckers. Better you than us." So that was how the war started. For the next, 6 or 7, what time is it? And what did you guys go into later?
No, you're good.
Yeah, we're good.
So as the war started,
I'm laughing my
what's
ass
that?
off.
You're laughing.
I said I'm laughing my ass off. It's keeping me
Wars,
very
there's a lot
awake.
of humor to war, and obviously it's awful, but
And
a lot of
the
funny,
other
goofy
hand.
shit. Running up to that, though, too, because I was bored, we would do, right before the war started, I think as I alluded, somebody decided that, maybe we could do nose art. And I said, well, I'm an artist. I can do that. And one day we would have the guy that was not doing the night's training missions. There would be a duty pig during the day, and we had a cot for him, and he'd just, get out of the training cycle. So I was the duty pig one day, and I decided that I was going to go. I wanted to do nose art, so I was going to go out on the flight line and grab the squad, get on the squadron commander's jet, and we had this crummy like block lettering for the pilot's name down on the nose. It was kind of goofy looking, so I thought, well, I'll do his name, Lieutenant Colonel Rick McDowell, in like nice script writing on his canopy rail. And I had this paint that had the consistency of like freaking nail polish. And it was like 103 anyway. And I'm out there and I was up on a B4 stand and I had taken a bunch of water, but the paint would literally dry immediately upon hitting the side of the airplane because it was so hot. So all I could get in was Lieutenant Colonel Rick. And I ran out of water and I'm exhausted. So I went back inside, the squadron, and I was taking a nap. And all of a sudden I heard there was 7 maintenance nets, all on the radio. And all of a sudden I heard, Gold 4, Blue 1. Who the hell painted something on 158's canopy? Blah, 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 blah. And we happened to have a female major who was the maintenance officer. She was an absolute bitch. And sorry, Lorraine. And I have no idea if she's still alive. And she comes running in. There was this big hullabaloo on the radios. And all of a sudden she comes running in the squadron. She goes, God damn it, who the hell painted something on the squadron commander's jet? I'm going to kick ass. This is bullshit, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, I have no idea. So I played dumb for
I think it went that way.
So I played dumb, and I'm the only moron in there. I played dumb for about 2 minutes. She goes, "You're an artist. It was you, wasn't you?" I'm like, you're in fucking trouble, blah, 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 blah. Like, oh, shit. So I go to, as the guys come in for the training missions that night, I go to leave because I'm going to go to sleep now because I'm exhausted. And all of a sudden the operations officer, the lieutenant colonel, comes in. He says, "Pork chop, do not pass go. Go see the boss." And I'm like, oh, fuck. So I'm in trouble now. So I walked into the boss, said, "I understand you painted my name on the side of the canopy rail." And I said, "Yes, sir. I was hoping he'd let me do some nose art." And he said, "I don't much need my name on the side, but could you paint a warthog with a smoking GAU-8 coming out of his mouth and a bunch of smoke curling off of it?" I said, "Absolutely." He says, "Press." So I went up right before the war started. I painted that, and I painted my buddy's. He was from Louisville, so Louisville Slugger, a baseball bat with a nail on the end of it that said "fuck Saddam" or some bullshit thing on the side of it. And everybody wanted their jets painted, and I was like, "Dude, I'm one dude. I can't do all these." So we had another dude who was really good at painting fast, and I was always too detailed. And he painted, I think, the other 22 or 3 jets right before, at the beginning, right as the war started. So he did a fantastic job, Joe Rush, because he was just a lot better at it. Once the war started, I was like, I got nothing. I ain't painting anything, because he just wanted all you cared about was sleeping and eating. So anyway, the war kicked off. Snort goes and flies that first A-10 combat mission, which now takes him out of the cycle of night flying for the next 36 hours until he can get, crew rest or whatever the hell you want to call it. So I'm left to do nothing. And there wasn't a lot going on at the time. The Marines had run up right south of the Kuwaiti border. They would do shoot and scoot artillery shots, shoots into southern Kuwait. But that was the only thing that was going on with the ground guys. So there was no close air support going on, and we were not part of the ATO in the first few days. So we were just sitting alert in case the good guys needed us. As it turned out, after about 2 or 3 days, the Marines would call us, and we would scramble guys. We had 4 jets on CAS alert at any time. And almost everybody in the squadron got scrambled except for 3 lieutenants, me being one of them. So I remember Scott Spiker was shot down, Hornet driver. That was a big deal. And I remember seeing that on NBC News. An A6 driver was shot down. Jeffrey Zahn, he was on the cover of Time. His face was all beat up. And, it was like, holy shit, this is fucking real. And people getting shot down. And we didn't have any losses in the A-10 yet, but and then Tornado GR-1s took serious losses. The Royal Air Force, they had this fucked up weapon called JP-233, which was a massive pack underneath the airplane where they would go smoking down a runway at 200 AGL, and it would fire out all these landmines, basically, and they lost a couple, 3 jets. So there was probably about 6 or 7 tactical jets got shot down in the first week or so, and it was like, okay, this is a war. They're fighting back. And Saddam had the 4th largest army in the world, and he had a shitload of SAMs and AAA. So, if nothing else, they could put up barrage fire that would water your eyes. I mean, it looked like a 12 o'clock high from, the movie. It was amazing, the flak that they could put up. And at night, it was really impressive. But so anyway, I have not flown day 6 of the war. and I still have not flown a one of the last 3 dudes that has not flown a combat mission. I'm thinking my war is going to end even before it started. And so as a joke, me and the other 2 lieutenants made some cardboard signs that said, "We are the Greenpeace pilots, no blood for oil," all this shit. And so finally on like day 6 or 7, I go put my jet on status, and we would go out and put the jet on status, check its systems. The Hog had an APU that was really good, so you could actually fire up all the systems without having to start the engines. And so we would go out and do that for about 15, 20 minutes. We'd go through flight control checks, and then we'd go back in and wait for a call. I had been on alert 4 times, and every time I came off, within 10 minutes of me giving the jets to the neck dudes, off they would go. So I'm like, holy fuck, this is never going to happen. So finally I go out and I put a jet on status.
You're the fluffer.
What's that? Exactly,
yeah. Like, I've left your jet for you, sir. Please go to war.
That's right. So I happened to go out, and the Schwarzkopf got pissed off at us earlier in Desert Shield. He said, "You guys don't have any sandbags, and you got no revetments, blah, 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 blah." So we had sandbag parties. I remember doing 2 days of making sandbags, and then made these massive revetments that were about 16 or 18 feet high, and they covered every hog running all the way down the parallel taxiway of the runway. So when you went out, you had to have somebody drive you out because you had no idea where your jet was. And so anyway, I get driven out to my jet, and I'm putting it on status. And I happen to have a African-American crew chief who was probably female, probably about 21 or 22. And she was from the Reserve New Orleans unit. So we would interchange and use other units people. And she said, and she happened to have a Cajun accent. She's, "Hey, sir, how you doing?" So I get to the airplane and jump in, and the Hog had fairly extensive flight control checks. It's like, left stick, left ailerons, blah, 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 blah. And I'd gotten about halfway through my flight control checks, and all of a sudden over the squadron operations frequency, I heard a call time was zip gun 1 and 2, I think. And it said zip gun 1 and 2, scramble, immediate cast scramble, 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 scramble. So I'm sitting there, and my leader calls me and says, "Mike, let's go, fire him up, let's go." So I sat there and I was like, holy shit, normally I got to set the jet up, go back inside, and then you're kind of like psychologically ready to run out to the airplanes. I was not ready. That sounds weird, but like putting it on status, didn't expect it to happen while I was putting the airplane on status. So I wasn't really thinking about that yet. So when they said go, it was like, oh, fuck. So she could hear, I can't remember if she could hear through the intercom. I think she could have. I think the pilot could select it. So she probably heard the saying we're going. And there was a long pause, and I kind of lost my train of thought for about 15, 20 seconds at the most. And in a Cajun African-American accent, she said to me, "So you're going to be just fine." So she made me laugh, and I was like, okay. And we continued with the flight control checks, and off we go, and I blast off on my first combat mission. So off we get up, we cross the border, and as we're getting up towards, it was like a Marine lieutenant colonel who was kind of controlling things from miles back on the ground. They had Marine OV-10s airborne. Their call sign was hostage, and there was one of the hostages. It gets dark as we cross the border, and we start contacting this Marine OV-10, and he says I got a Frog, which is a free rocket. There's a type of rocket launcher, free rocket overground, what was his name for it. It's kind of like a mini Scud on a big truck. And he says I got a Frog rocket launcher, which appears to be next to a building, 2-story building. He says there's a dude I can see sitting in the 2nd-story window with a light on, and my leader's like, "Are you fucking kidding me? He can see this?" So, because he had a flare that was really good, and they didn't have weapons. All they had was smoke rockets. So he says, "Your target is that. Run in, blah blah blah." We had like a 6-mile run in, so there was a low undercast at about 10 to 12,000 feet, and we were at about 14,000. We were supposed to not go below 10. CENTAF had said some Vipers had taken some hits, and they're like, "Nobody go below 10." We couldn't operate that high typically. So, but there was nothing to hide behind like in Europe. So our plan of masking at 80 or 100 AGL was out. So we were doing like a kind of a medium to low threat tactics type thing, and staying at like mid 10 to 15, 18,000 feet was about as high as we would get. So anyway, I'm nervous as hell because this is my first combat mission. He's had a couple. So he's technically a veteran. And so he starts a Maverick run going towards this thing and nosing down from probably about 10 or 12,000 feet. I'm at 14 or 15,000 feet. I've got 6 Mark 82s, a bunch of Mavericks, 2 AIM-9s, an ECM pod, and I'm at like 18,000 feet covering them in just like a figure 8 pattern. And the A-10 had a stall warning tone. So every turn I'm getting a stall warning tone because it's just a pig of an airplane. And I'm doing like 220. So I'm smoking along in combat at 220 in this jet that's just, meat on the table. And there's just a bazillion SAMs and AAA out there. So sure enough, as soon as he puts his nose in, he gets about 4 miles from the target. And we're probably 10 miles inside Kuwait at the time. All of a sudden, the bad guys start shooting. And they had more fucking guns than you could shake a stick at. We were not getting direct spikes, but we could see occasional spikes from like a GCA radar back in, Kuwait City. And all of a sudden, 23, 37, some 57 starts coming up. And it's everywhere. And the 57 would go up to 15, 16, 17,000 feet. The 20 and 37 up, only up to, 8 to 10 at the most, Fort Max ordered. But you could see every friggin' tracer. And so I said, dude, you're taking fire. And he just very calmly said, roger that. And I'm like, okay, fucking hero boy. And he had to be like right in it. And I'm looking at this shit, and it was the lighter caliber stuff was blowing up had to be right beneath him. So I call him like, snort, dude, it's really intense. And he's like, I got it. And I'm like, fuck, okay. So he would pull off. He couldn't get the Maverick to lock because of the undercast. The weapon couldn't see through the cloud. So he was getting frustrated. He'd pull off. Every time he'd pull off, the fire would die down. So they could see us with some type of like radar back in Kuwait City. They just weren't mating it up to the guns because they were terrified of an F-4G chucking a harm at them. So he would roll back in, and it got more intense. And finally, on his third pass, he started to get low on gas, and he was talking to the OV-10, and he's like, I can't get my missile can't see through the clouds. So he did his last run, and now the fire is just incredibly intense. And 57 explodes and clips up 4, so it's like, boom, boom, boom. And that was above him. He wasn't concerned about that, but the lighter caliber shit was right at his altitude. And I said, dude, you are right in the middle of all this shit. And again, he's like, Mike, I got it. Fuck, okay. So he finally pulls off. He says, off right, we can't employ. So we go home, cover our, dicks between our legs, not having done anything. He's all pissed off because he didn't get to shoot. And we land, and typically we would fly 2 missions a night. So we landed, we get more gas, and I'm in hot pits refueling and for our second mission. And there was a naturalized American English kid who was a naturalized American citizen, and 2 other guys with the refuelers. And so they start talking to me, and I'm yammering like I am now, just out of nervousness. And I got one under my belt. And all of a sudden he says, what was it fucking like? I said, it fucking sucked. All I did was get shot at. So he said, you shoot anything back? I'm like, no, I did. My leader tried, but we couldn't do it. He goes, oh, fucking. So I'm sitting there, and I was so nervous. I'm yammering like this. I said, I must sound like a complete pussy. And he says, oh, no, mate, you're doing fucking great. He goes, some of the day guys, they wouldn't even talk to us, or they're like shaking in the cockpit and shit. I'm like, you're kidding me. So he kind of bucked me up because I thought, I was kind of being a weenie. And, there were dudes who were doing much worse than me, I guess. So it's like, all right, fine. So I get my gas, and we're rolling down towards arming. And we had just gotten armed. And I'll never forget, there was this ancient master sergeant. And he said something like, dude, you're fully armed up, 6 Mark 82s, full load of gun, chaff and flares, kick ass, and no prisoners. Something like that. And I just laughed. All right, thanks, dude. And off we go. And no sooner do I get armed up, and all of a sudden, alarm red, inbound scuds, motherfucker. So we're sitting number 1, and I don't think I'd ever done a rolling takeoff in a hog. And my leader calls the tower. The tower has already put on his friggin' mop gear for a chemical attack. And he says, can we take off? And I'm like, you're trying to be a takeoff. Because you can't hear him through his fucking mask. So he says, Mike, let's go. So we take the runway rolling, put him in the northwest corner, get airborne. And our normal turn out of traffic was to the east. And all of a sudden I said, dude, what's that? And I see this thing like fiery trail at right 1 o'clock high. And I said, what the hell is that? And he goes, it's a fucking Scud. And as this thing's coming down, I see 2 other trails coming up from the Dhahran area, about 25 miles away, appear to be Patriots. And those things go smoking up at him. And you see boom, boom. And it's like, holy fuck, they're Patriots. And he says, dude, I think we should go to the west. I'm saying, that's probably a good call. So, yeah.
Great idea.
So we leave, and we go back, and we head back north, and they give us the same target again. So we're going to the free ride rocket, and we still get the same undercast. So we're at about 14,000 feet, and we had figured out on an INS check that one of our INSs was off by about 15 or 20 miles. Now, air to ground, that's a big fucking deal. And we had no way to update because there was nothing visually you could update. We could only visually update. So one of us had a bad INS, and we didn't know which one. So I said, well, what are we going to do with this? And he was a pretty aggressive guy. And he says, I don't know, we'll air to the conservative side. I'm like, what the the fuck does that mean? He goes, I don't know, just follow me. So, okay, fine. So I'm 2 to 4 miles behind him, air-to-air attack-in trail, and we would call it fence. We fenced in, turned our lights off about 10 or 15 miles south of the Kuwaiti border, or so we thought. And so all of a sudden, this undercast, and as I said, he's 2 to 4 miles in front of me. I can't see him because of the lights out. This undercast suddenly has this massive, like, roiling white light. And I'd actually been shot at. I didn't talk about it, but we've been shot at. This is my third mission. We were shot at by SA-2s. So I got to see those, and they were skull fuckers. They would come down on you from on high, and then the boosters would burn out. And he was Mr. Electronic Combat Boy, getting ahead of things. So we were going over a Syrian tank unit, and they told us that if we turned on our ECM pods, that they would shoot us. Thank you very much. So anyway, and they were supposed to be the good guys on our side. So we didn't have our ECM pods on. This was the mission before the one where I'm talking about the roiling white light. And all of a sudden I see these things back at right 5, and I see these 2 massive flames. And I said, Snort, what's back at right 5? He goes, they're fucking SA-2s. He goes, shit, get energy. I'm like, get energy in a fucking hog? You know, I mean, you're nosing over it. If I nose over 10 degrees, I might get up with all the shit I get on to like 325. And there's an undercast beneath us. So I'm watching these things, and I'm not directly spiked, but they do appear to be some type of weapon firing in our general direction. And there's 2 of them in typical Soviet fashion, fired about 3 or 4 seconds apart. And one of them starts to come down on us, and all of a sudden, both the boosters go out. And now we can't see them. So all of our anti-SAM tactics are based on seeing the missile and doing an orthogonal roll to break into the son of a bitch at the last second. Well, how do you do that if you can't see it? So I said to him, what do we do now, jackass? And he said, suddenly his calm demeanor went away, and he says, I don't know, wait about 8 to 10 seconds, then pull like a motherfucker. Which I thought was excellent advice. And so I waited a few seconds, did a couple of hog turns, which again, everything's relevant in hog, ran out of energy, didn't die. And I'm like, all right, we pressed on to our target, which we could not find again because of the goddamn sandstorms and clouds. So anyway, moving on to the next mission. And so this massive white light. So all I've done is get shot at by AAA and SAMs. So I'm like, okay, I've seen everything that I need to see that's going to kill me, up to now. This massive white light in the clouds kind of boils in front of us and like starts to burgeon out. And all of a sudden these fucking ton of these fiery trails are coming up at us. I'm talking like 50 or 75 of them. Okay, so I'd seen AAA, wasn't that. Seen SAMs, can't be that. What the fuck is this? And it seems to be coming right at us. And now there's like 100 of them. And they're covering the whole sky, covering right at us. So he doesn't say anything. Instinctively, I brake hard left and away. And he says to me, Mike, brake right. And I'm like, dude, I'm well ahead of you. So he brakes hard right. and this is my third mission. All we've done is get shot at. And here we are, the vaunted Americans come to kick ass, and we're running away like pussies. So he goes to the right, I go left. And the air-to-air attack-aim lock starts to waver between us. And as I'm running away, these things kind of like max ord and fall behind us. And we didn't figure out till another 2 days that it was Katyusha 122 millimeter Iraqi truck-fired rocket launchers. They have like 30 of them in the back of a truck, and the whole battery has 4 of them. And they were firing these things at the Marines that happened to be right underneath us, and it just looked like they were coming at us. And I thought it was some kind of Iraqi secret weapon. So anyway, we don't know what the fuck they are, but we're running like crazy. And I'm laughing in my cockpit just out of nervousness as these things fall behind me. And all I could think of was the scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where they're trying to attack the castle, and they start throwing the cow at him, and they run away bravely. So I'm just laughing my ass off because that's all I can imagine. And so I said to him, I said, dude, what the fuck was that? And he says nothing. And normally he was pretty, not chatty on the radio, but he was always informing me what he was up to. And the air-to-air attack-aim lock is wavering, and I'm thinking, fuck, did he get hit? And a full 60 seconds has gone by, 90 seconds, and he hasn't said anything. So I'm like, 1, 2, you all right? No response. 1, 2, are you all right? And all of a sudden, like, he has a dawning, and he says, we could get killed doing this. Like, no shit, you fucking moron. So, mission 3 now, all I've done is get shot. I didn't know what the fuck these are. And I haven't even fired anything yet. So we go back, and he says, well, let's go home. God damn it. Our airlines are fucked up. We can't operate like this. So he's all pissed off. But so we land, and So we're debriefing him with the squadron commander was near there, and he said, "Were you guys up by that AAA and the SAMs that we saw earlier?" And he goes, "Yeah, we saw it." He was a good boy for getting out of there. There was a lot of shit there, and so he says, "But I learned something tonight." And this is my leader. He says, "I learned two things. The nose of the hog is very bulbous and very big, which means that the pilot can't really see very well a little bit to the down and the side and in the front. And the reason I know that also too is that listen to your fucking wingman." Because Porkchop was screaming at me that there was all this fucking AAA. I didn't see a fucking thing, and I thought he was high. And finally, the third time when he was screaming at me that this shit's blowing up, I rolled up and I looked down, and all this 23 and 37 is max ordering and fucking blowing up probably 300 feet beneath my fucking jet. So listen, I'm going to listen to my fucking wingman. Because he was so mad at when we landed. He's like, damn it, I know it's fucking there. I'm like, all right, fuck it. I didn't know you saw it, but... So anyway, so that was the first few missions. After that, probably the most memorable couple missions I can remember was about halfway through the war. We actually lost two dudes from my sister squadron. They got hit. They were strafing T-72s in the middle of the day. And this guy, Captain Steve Phillis, was a fighter weapons school grad at 2,000 hours in the hog, very well-respected A-10 IP. And he had the youngest lieutenant in the squadron on his wing, a guy named Sweetness, and so Rob Sweet. And so I had seen them about a week prior. Snort and I had done a mission, and Snort was rolling down the chute on a strafing pass, and the bad guy started to shoot back at him. And I told him to break right, you're taking fire. And as he did, also he said, knock it off, which is kind of funny in combat, but it's still the same deal. He said, knock it off. I'm egressing to the south. I've been hit. So he egresses to the south. The border was about 15, 20 miles away. And we had a forward operating location at King Khalid Military City, about 80 miles to the southwest. And so he said, I'm headed to KKMC. He says, roll in and suppress the bad guys and then follow me. So I roll in and I hit the trigger, and we didn't really fire the gun much at night because you couldn't judge bullet drop, but I could see shit coming back at us. So I pulled the trigger. It was the first time I pulled the trigger in the war, and I hear this weird noise, and I realized after a couple seconds, I don't see. Normally, you'd see like the muzzle blast would come up over the canopy at night, and there was no gun gas. What the fuck? And I looked down, and the rounds counter is not counting down, and I realized the gun has misfired somehow. What had happened was somehow like the cannon plug that connects into the electrical cannon plug that connects into the gun system was not seated correctly. So it was like getting half electricity. So the gun spun, but the rounds did not go into the cannon. So I'm hanging my ass out as the bad guys are shooting back at me, and I got nothing to show for it. I'm like, this is good. So I pull hard off, and luckily, did not get hit. And he asked me to do a battle damage check. So I actually put my gear down. I put my landing light down. And I did a battle damage check, and I'm looking at his jet, getting as close as I could. And I said, dude, I can't see anything. You appear to be okay. And he goes, I'll do a controllability check. But he says, no shit, I had this massive bang in the nose. So I think I was hit. So we land at KKMC, and I pull up next to him, and I look over, and his jet is totally disfigured from the nose about 10 feet back. What had happened was, as he fired his gun, we typically had a what we called combat mix of 5 armor piercing and 1 high explosive incendiary. And the high explosive incendiary was like a big grenade. And so one of the armor piercing rounds had not fired in the barrel, stayed in it, and the next round fired into the back of it, and it caused a small explosion in his nose. Luckily, it wasn't a high explosive incendiary because it probably would have blown his nose off, but it did pretty good damage anyway. So the barrels on the A-10 are about 8 to 10 feet long. And I remember looking over, and the bottom of the airplane was all disfigured, and the snout of the gun, it was bent like spaghetti. It was wild to see. So they actually downloaded the gun in place right there, and the Army, in typical Army fashion, let's blow it up. They moved it out in the desert, and they buried it in the sand, and they blew it in place. So we went to try and get some sleep that night, and it was the forward operating location was really, really busy. Dudes would fly missions, go there, refuel, rearm, and go back and do it again. So it was impossible to get sleep. And Captain Steve Phillis, the guy I was talking about that got shot down about a week later, was there. And a bunch of other dudes. There was an experienced hog driver that had some combat time from Vietnam. Growth Wilson was his name. And he had a handlebar mustache and was bald, the dude. He was like 6'3". He was just an imposing figure. Great dude. And he'd flown like O-1s and Sky Raiders or some shit like that, and did Air America. Had like a really shady past. So anyway, we're all talking about the war and discussing it, and like in war, so like two weeks into the war now, and there'd been some losses. That A6 had been shot down. That Jeffrey's on was on the cover of Time, and so we start talking about what would you do if you get shot down. There was like 8 of us, and so we had one dude in my squadron that not only carried a 9mm, but he carried 6 clips and 75 loose rounds. So I said, Scotty,
Wow.
what are you going to take on an infantry company when you're only going to get killed, dude, when you pull that thing up? He said, oh, I'm going to take them on. And some hog drivers are pretty wild. They have like boot knives and shit like that. It was kind of like a hog thing. So I think Sif might have had a boot knife, but he was real quiet, and he's just listening to us talk. The war's getting serious. What are you going to do if you get shot down? So everybody kind of talked about what they do, and I think it was me that looked over at Sif, and I said, what about you? And he just very calmly looked at me and he said, they ain't getting me. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, you fucking heard me. They ain't getting me. So I just blew it off as false bravado. And so about a week later, 10 days later, he and Sweetness are strafing some T-72s in the middle of the day. And Sweetness gets targeted by an SA-13. SA-13 Gopher is a smokeless IR contrast seeker head SAM. Very deadly at the time. And the hogs we had were painted green. So the green hogs stuck out like a sore thumb, for contrast seeker head. And I remember asking the powers that be as an artist, I'm like, this thing is like a sore thumb. Can we paint these fuckers sand colored? No, we're not going to do that. They later found out that just by painting, the hogs went back to being painted gray after Desert Storm. And that that alone, the paint job alone was 70% effective against IR contrast. So we probably lost a couple of guys because the jets were painted green. So anyway, he suddenly calls on the radio to his leader and he says, dude, I've been hit. He says, I'm jumping out. So he gets hit in the right wing root. The wing folds up over the side of his airplane, and he tried to stay with it, but obviously he can't, and he jumps out of the jet. So Sif starts a cap, and he calls a bunch of the squadron mates about 20 miles south and says, hey, wingman's been hit, setting up a cap, come help me out. So oddly enough, the call sign for battle damage that day was bagged, and I think his call sign was Enfield 3-1, and all of our call signs were like guns, Ruger, Enfield, Luger. And so they asked him his status, the other 2 ship coming to help him when he was about 10 miles out. And he just very calmly said, Enfield 3-1 is bagged. And they said, say again. And there was no response again. So he disappears. We don't know what happened. So they're both shot down as far as we know. So Sweetness landed 15 yards from the T-72 he'd been trying to strafe. So needless to say, the infantrymen that were around there were not happy with him. They started shooting at him in a chute on the way down. They all miss. And they run up to him when he lands, and they start beating him with the butts of AKs. And he's afraid he's going to be killed. An officer runs up and fires a pistol in the air, gets them away. They pack him into a truck. But before they pack him into the truck, they bring him over to the SA-13 that shot him down. So he meets the SA-13 gunner. And the gunner plays the tape for him. I was like, look, I fucking got you. And but he's terrified now because, American fighter bombers, other hogs are out there. They put him in a truck to Baghdad, which is like an 8-hour drive. And he's like, fuck, I am in a moving truck. I am like a moth to a flame target to every fucking hog out here. But luckily he survives, but he doesn't know that his leader's been shot down. We only find out at the end of the war that Sif, they sent a recovery team up later at the end of the war, and they found his jet. It was intact. He had crashed, pancaked, I think, kind of, and he was in the seat. The seat was intact as far as they know. He did not pull the handles. So I don't know all the ins and outs of it. There's actually a book, I can't remember what it's named out. An Academy classmate of his wrote a book. He was awarded, I can't remember either the Silver Star or I think, but he was trying to get him the CMH, the Congressional Medal of Honor, for trying to cap over his wingman. And there's, I think it's still a move afoot to try and do that. So I believe in his book, they came to the conclusion that he was incapacitated somehow in the cockpit. Personally, I don't know, but given the conversation that we had a week earlier, I believe he wrote it in by choice. It's just my feeling. I don't know if that's true or not. There is a record of an F-4 driver in Vietnam that did the same thing. He was a fighter weapons school grad, and his Wizzo, they got hit by MiG-19s with 30 millimeter cannon fire. And the Wizzo said, I'm jumping out. And he said, you go ahead if you want to. And he stayed and he wrote it in. So I think he may have done the same thing, but who's to know? But the seat was intact, and he could have jumped out as far as we know. And I don't buy being, you can't, a hog just can't be thrown about all that much to be incapacitated. But who knows? He got hit by a missile. We think he got hit by the same SA-13 that killed his leader. I mean, killed his wingman. So anyway, all that shit had happened. And so we get tasked, the 354th Fighting Wing gets tasked with destroying the Tawakalana Republican Guard Armored Division. Saddam had 3 Republican Guard Armored Divisions. They were his best soldiers. And these guys were dug in about in a 10 mile long by about 5 mile divisional area that was just to the west of the Kuwaiti border. A-10 guys, we never got intel beyond, there are tanks there, go to them. There was an airborne command and control, ABCCC C-130 that controlled the air-to-ground war. We would take off with a target and it would change 95% of the time. So they would say, go to kill box Alpha Echo 5, you're cleared there, flight lead control for the next 30 minutes, hunt and kill. So that's what we would do. We would just find at night, any armor that stood out. So we were, but the whole wing was tasked with destroying this armor division, and they gave us, the intel powers that be gave us a printout of where every T-72 was, lat long or UTM was. So we were armed. Wow, cool. We got like real intel because we never got shit like that. So we go up there and we're going to go hunt for these things. And my leader goes up and all he can find was like trucks or APCs. So he flames with Mavericks, 2 trucks. We had given up on using the multiple rail Maverick launchers. You could carry 6, but we found that they misfired a lot and we would have hung Mavericks. So we decided to go to the parent mounted on each wing. So we only carried 2 and they were very dependable. So he killed 2 trucks and now he's like, all right, Mike, I'm in cover. You go ahead and shoot your Mavericks. So he would cover me visually and I was at about 16 or 18,000 feet. It was a moonlit night and I'm hunting for these T-72s and I really can't find anything. And all of a sudden he says to me, I think I saw a truck up to the north. Go ahead and look up there. So I find what appears to be a truck or an APC, and I flame that with a Maverick. But I'm not satisfied, so I start hunting for tanks. And again, I got about 15 miles away from him, and he says, God damn it, you get too far away from me. Come back to the south. So I come back to the south where he was, and he says, I think I saw a glint of light on, there was like a medium, what we call a hardball road, and a dirt road. He says, right at the intersection, the T intersection, I think I saw a glint of light. I'm like, a glint of light at night? And he says, just fucking look at it. And so this was our comm. It was pretty trucker-like. So he said, just do what I told you to do. I'm like, all right, fine. So I'm at like 15,000 feet. And I actually had flamed, the second one that I flamed was near there. He says, I think it's right next to the one, it appears to be right near the one that you just flamed. I'm like, all right. So I come back to the first one that I hit and I could see the fire. And I was at about 16,000 feet. Roll on, I was pretty tight to it, azimuth-wise. So I roll on my back and reef down. And it was funny, looking back on it, the boss had said, you guys don't realize how good you are. You're doing shit like rolling inverted at night and all this kind of stuff, stuff that you're not really supposed to do. And it's become routine for you. So we really didn't even think about it. Roll down, pull a couple of G's to get the nose down, and I'm screaming downhill, go idle. And I'm probably 60 degrees nose low. And I call my Maverick up at about 13,000 feet. And I can see the flames from the first one that I've hit. And that is causing the secret head of my Maverick to bite off on it because it's a really bright flame. But as I'm diving down, and I'll never forget the altimeter unwinding, 12,000, 11,000, 10,000, 5,000 safe escape. And I'm fighting against time to try and get the weapon off and get it onto the good target as I see now a good, what appears to be BTR 60 or something like that, some small APC that's probably 15, 20 yards from the one that I just hit. So as I selected narrow field, you could select wide and narrow. And as I select narrow, the one that it hit kind of goes off to the side and the flames are not as bright. So it allows me to start trying to get a better lock on the good target. And now I'm passing like 8, 7, and I'm running out of time. And I'm like, God damn it, I can't get this thing to lock on. It would jump off on the fire. Finally, right at about 6,000 feet, it locks on. And as I get the lock on, I see all these little white spots going back and forth from the fire of the APC that I'd killed a few minutes earlier and the one that I'm targeting now. And all these things go through your mind. And I was brought up as a not quite so card-carrying Catholic kid. So, here we are. War is horrible. You're sitting there getting shot at, people are getting killed, obviously. And as air-to-ground guys or fighter pilots, you don't often get to see shit that infantrymen do, the blood, the gore, whatever, whatnot. But we had seen, guys running around on our Maverick displays. So as I'm looking at this, and I realize that it's dudes running back and forth, and it still hasn't clued into me yet. The first thought was, how could they be so stupid as to get so close to another APC that I had just killed? It's an obvious, kind of landmark or whatever, whatnot. And I thought and all this is going through my mind in milliseconds. And I'm sitting there thinking, how could they be so stupid? And then as my thumb is coming down on the pickle button, I realize these dudes are taking their dead and dying buds from the one I just killed to the one that I'm targeting. And my thumb hit the weapon, and it came off the rail. And I pulled off. My leader called rifle, which was a signal for coming off the rail. And I pulled off, and I just thought, God, this is just fucking awful, as I probably took out 6 or 8 guys minimum, which is fucking horrible. But, they're in the middle of a war, so this is what we're here to do. So I pull off. We egress to the south. Or actually, my leader says, all right, I'm going to bomb them. So he says, I'll be in, you go high cover, I'm going to bomb them in about 30 seconds. So we were carrying 6 Mark 82s with FMU-113 radar fuses on the nose. These would cause the bomb to detonate 25 feet above the ground. And a Mark 82 can kill somebody out to about 300 or 400 feet and maim them out to, 800 or 900, something like that. And we're carrying 6 of them. So he rolls down, and he had spent some time in Korea. They did a lot of what we call high 45 dive bombs. And he was the master of the high 45 dive bomb, and that's what we were doing. And he put a perfect stick of 6 right over both fires. I mean, it was, and they F-113s, FMU-113 radar fuses cause a Mark 82 to look like a small nuclear explosion at night because they're exploding above the ground. And it's just these massive 6 fireballs perfectly over both APCs. And I thought, holy shit, there is nobody that survived that. So he says, I'm off to the south, arm your bombs, go ahead and hit the same one. And I said, snort, there is nobody alive down there. And he says, well, fuck, they might have run away to the east. Bomb just to the fucking east. Maybe they're in foxholes just to the east. So I put my bombs on down there. I did not hold. You had to hold the pickle button for longer than normal to get the bombs off. And I only got 5 of 6 off. Another dumb lieutenant moment. He says, dude, I only saw 5. I'm like, yeah, fuck, I didn't hold it down long enough. So I start eating it to the south, and he says, just drop it on that fucking road over there. And it was like a B-17. I drop it as I'm climbing, and there's no fucking chance of hitting anything. It's like, boom, whatever. So as I'm fencing out, I did everything by hand. And especially on a moonlit night, you didn't even need, you could see the cockpit perfectly. And so fencing out, and we had 2 switch positions for looking through the HUD. Would film the HUD, obviously, by day, so you could see your bomb passes and strafing. Or you could select Maverick, and it would film the Maverick display. So I had looked down, and I felt for the switch for that system, and I realized that I had left it in the HUD by mistake. So I was like, fuck, the film would have been amazing. You can see dudes running back and forth. And then as I'm cruising further south, I thought, I probably don't need to see that again. It's forever etched in my mind. And and we were all coming home and saying, dude, look at my film. But it was, again, it's something that I'll never forget. So we land, and we refuel and rearm, and we're going to go out for a second mission. We think we're going back to the same area because we're going to go back and find these T-72s. We couldn't find the T-72s because the Republican Guard were good soldiers, and they had buried their tanks all the way up to the turret. So that diffused the heat image, and you couldn't see the heat image on them. So they knew what they were doing. So we took off thinking we're going back, and all of a sudden we get a call saying that there's something going on in southeastern Kuwait. And unbeknownst to us, there was a Iraqi armored attack about 3 or 4 days earlier that had come across the Saudi border in 3 places. And they had attacked a Saudi town about 10 miles inside of Saudi Arabia called Khafji. And they had occupied it for about 2 days. The Saudi Arabians counterattacked along with some Qataris, and there was a pretty good fight there. And then under the cover of night, unbeknownst to us, the remaining Iraqi forces decided to retreat back inside of Kuwait. And so all of a sudden, we get wind of that, and we're told, go there. So we go there. We've got 4 cans of Mark 20 Rockeye. We did not have flares on the air, parachute flares, which we typically carried that night. And we went up to try and attack these guys. some of our, we had about 3 or 4 other two ships cycle in already, and they were working with a Marine OV-10, and they found this virgin convoy, if you will, of about 80 or 100 APCs and tanks from the Iraqi, we later found out was the Iraqi 5th Mech Division. And they were trying to retreat back inside of Kuwait, as I said. So they had already been hit pretty hard by our guys when we got there. And I would say there was probably already about 30 or 40 fires burning from separate vehicles on this road. So Snort goes in, my leader, and he flames 2 vehicles with the Mavericks. We were taking SA-7 fire, which is worthless at night, but they look pretty cool corkscrewing up at night because they were just, they were just getting hammered by us. And some light AAA, but it wasn't near us, so we just avoided it. We got very good and very adept at, or just used to being fired at, because we knew it wasn't targeted. It was just barrage fire, so we just avoid it. But it was very pretty and pretty eye-watering to see at times. But so anyway, he handed it off to me, and I had a feeling that for whatever reason, I had a feeling that they were attacking rather than retreating. And I called up my first Maverick, and there was like a Y in the road that I could see probably about 3 or 4 miles ahead of me. We would glide down from about 10,000 feet. The weapons officer would come up with this Rube Goldberg thing where the Maverick hanging 6 degrees below the nose low from the A-10's nose would be looking at this INS point. So for a couple miles, sure enough, we had fires burning on the ground anyway. So I call it up and put it on the fires, and I can see I wanted the 2 vehicles that appeared to be closest to the Marines. The Marines were right underneath us or close to us. And so I saw 2 vehicles were pretty close together. And I fired my first Maverick and came around for a second pass. And again, you could see the crews jumping out. They knew their vehicles were death traps. So they would just jump out and start running. So you could see, they were like cockroaches, and you could see these, skittering away from the vehicles. My second one, I was having a hard time again because the first fire that I hit was so big. I don't know if he destroyed 2 vehicles, but it was a massive fire. So the second one was harder to target, but I got in close and it got a good shot off. Kind of an aside, but about 6 months later after the war, I'm doing my stupid instrument test, for every 6 months for an instrument check in the weapons building at Myrtle Beach. And I hear our wing weapons officer talking to 2 new pilots about how to target a Maverick effectively. And unbeknownst to me, they had made a film and used some guy's Maverick passes. So I looked, he says, this is a textbook Maverick attack. And it was my pass. It was that one right there. So my minor claim to fame was apparently he was happy with my technique of how to target a Maverick. So anyway, got the second Maverick off, and we had Mark 20 Rockeye. Snort went right down the length of the convoy and dropped his Rockeye. For Beth, Rockeye is an anti-armor bomb. It carries 247 bomblets, fin bomblets, with a titanium, uranium, what the fuck do they call it? Spent uranium, just like an A-10 round, a 30 millimeter round, and it will penetrate a tank, no problem. So these things splay out in a pattern like a donut, and it looked like 4 donuts, and the 4 donuts went right down the convoy, and he probably took out another 6 or 8 vehicles minimum with that pass. It was excellent. So he said, we're running low on gas, and he says to me, Mike, target the dudes to the south. And I was too far to the east, and I was perpendicular to the road, and I was really not in a good position to drop my bombs, and I was kind of at lower altitude than I needed to be. So I thought, well, I'll get as close as I can and try and do a decent pass. As I rolled in, I realized I was going to be on a really shallow wire, and which means that my bombs are probably going to be short if I drop at the prescribed release altitude. So I pressed as low as I dared, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 feet, something like that. And I peppered them off, and I knew when I dropped them that it was not going to be a good pass. So the first one hits like 200 yards short of the road. Second one, 150. The third, 100. And the last one barely laps up onto the road and might have killed a vehicle, but I don't think so. So sure enough, from the leader, I get, what the fuck was that? I'm like, dude, I was out of position, and I just, it was not a good place where I was at. Fuck. He says, I'm going to make one last strafe pass. So he rolls down the length of the convoy and takes out another bunch of vehicles with a perfect strafe pass. And he says, we're getting out of here because of gas. So he says, I'm pulling off to the south. Unbeknownst to me is when I come back and look at the film, all the crews had run right where my bombs were. So anti-armor bombs will do quite a number on humans as well as so unlucky for those poor dudes.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for being here with us today. Please join us next week. We're going to be picking up with the rest of Magoo's time in Iraq, and then we're going to talk about his transition to the F-15 Strike Eagle and about his time flying with the US Navy and the differences between flying Navy and flying Air Force. Can't wait to have you. See you next week.